broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Max. I'm the admin assistant for the Mid-North Network. I'm going to be the tech support today. So during the webinar, if anyone has any pressing questions at all, feel free to put your hand up or pose the questions. Otherwise, there will be a question section at the end, some time for questions at the end. And Robyn will answer all that. So since we only have about 20 people registered right now, we're going to probably start around 1:05. So I will let Robyn introduce herself then, and we'll be good to go. I should mention as well, there are the handouts available to download. So you should see on the control panel, the handout section. There is the French version as well as the English one. I will ask at the end of the session, if anyone did have a hard time downloading that, you guys can raise up your hand and I will make sure to get your email to send it over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Robyn. It's about 1:05 p.m. We thought we'd give people a couple of extra minutes just to log in. It's always hard right after lunch, so I'm going to get started now. As Max said already, in case you've just joined us, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. Max is going to be tech support and she's going to keep track of the questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the session. So she's going to keep track of those questions for me. And also, as she just mentioned, in case you didn't hear her, there are PDFs in French and English that you can download of the presentation afterwards. For your own use. So she'll check in and make sure that everybody was able to do that at the end of the session. So this particular webinar is the second in a series of 3 webinars that the Mid-North Network asked me to develop actually last fiscal year at the end of the year, and then present during this current fiscal year. So this is, the first was a kind of an overview and back to basics on essential skills in the OALCF, and this webinar, assessment essential skills in the OALCF, the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework, is meant to build on that initial webinar that we did. I believe it was in October, so earlier in the fall of this year. And just before we really get started, if you're having any issues also hearing me or any tech issues, put it in the chat as well, or put your hand up and Max will try to help you out. So hopefully everybody can hear me and I'm clear. It's a fairly lengthy presentation, so there's a lot of material in here. Again, don't worry, you can download the presentation. And I will try to move through the information as quickly as possible without hopefully going too fast. So in this webinar, we're going to look at assessment as it relates to literacy and basic skills and essential skills assessments. I'm going to provide a brief introduction to the theory behind complexity in essential skills. And we're also going to look at assessment resources that you can use in the literacy and basic skills program. And again, as I said, the webinar builds on the Back to Basics webinar that we presented in the early fall. The webinar is scheduled to go till 3 o'clock, so I will definitely try to wrap up earlier than that, the material, so that you have an opportunity to ask questions. So the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework, which I will refer to for the most part as the OALCF from here on out, uses 3 levels to describe a learner's proficiency. The framework is informed by the same factors that drive complexity in essential skills levels 1, 2, and 3. The features include the extent to which the context is familiar and factors that make text and tasks increasingly complex. And we're going to talk a lot about that today during the webinar. The framework, the OALCF framework, only relates to the first 3 levels because the International Adult Literacy Survey indicated that adults with level 3 skills can meet most of the essential skill demands on daily life. And usually at that point, when they can do tasks at a level 3, they're able to transfer skills from one context to another. So the International Adult Literacy Survey rated proficiency in 4 domains. It focused on prose literacy, document literacy, numeracy, and problem solving on the basis of 5 different levels. But level 3 is recognized internationally as the desired threshold for coping with the increasing demands in a knowledge society. Context familiarity, text complexity, and task requirements all contribute to how challenging a task is that an adult has to do. The curriculum framework scale is consistent with the interpretation of the essential skills complexity scales for several of the essential skills, but it also departs from that framework because it has a different purpose. The purpose of the OALCF is to support adult learning, so it doesn't draw exclusively on essential skills for the conceptualization of all the levels. And I think that's important to know. It does draw on essential skills, but the research behind the OALCF also looked at several other different sources and frameworks and systems that are out there, including the Manitoba Stages of Literacy, the Australia Core Skills Framework, Canadian Language Benchmarks, the Adult Literacy and Numeracy Curriculum from England, and also the Equipped for the Future system in the United States. So it was kind of all of that information together helped inform the development of the OALCF, but it was meant to be a unique framework that was for the Adult Literacy and Basic Skills program in Ontario. So the OALCF, as I said, it relates to or draws from the first 3 levels of essential skills in terms of its complexity. Just like the essential skills, the level relates to the task the learner isn't performing and not the learner themselves. So a learner isn't at a level, they're actually performing a task at a particular level. A learner can have the ability to do tasks at various levels depending on the skill in essential skills or the competency in the OALCF that you're talking about or referring to. So someone might be able to do numeracy tasks at a level 3, but only be able to do reading and writing tasks at a level 1. It just depends on the learner and their current skill level and current skill gaps. So we're going to talk today a lot about assessment in both LBS and what that looks like in terms of the framework. And then we're also going to talk about essential skills assessments when they're particular to the essential skills scale. So in this next section, we're going to really focus on essential assessment as it relates to the current LBS program and what rolled out in terms of assessment when the framework, the OALCF, rolled out. So assessment is one of the 5 core services that are offered through the Literacy and Basic Skills program. The other services include, if we were live right now, I would actually test you on this and make somebody rhyme them off to me, but because we're not live, I'll just tell them to you. So the other services include information and referral, learner plan development, training, and follow-up. So that, along with assessment, comprise the 5 core services that we deliver through the Literacy and Basic Skills program. Assessment is also considered to be one of the main features of the OALCF. So the other features are competencies, learner transitions to work, further education and training or independence, and learning materials. So there are four key features to the OALCF, but we deliver 5 core services in LBS. According to the LBS guidelines, assessment gathers information about a learner's knowledge, skills, behaviors, and abilities. It forms a critical part of everyday activities in a literacy program as decisions are made on the best way to meet the learner's needs. Assessment includes a range of approaches from the informal processes to standardized tests. Assessments are conducted at intake, during program, and when a learner completes the learner plan, or in other words, at exit. So that is the actual definition as it is written right now in the current version of the service provider guidelines that literacy and basic skills programs are required to follow. Within LBS, we have 3 basic stages of assessment. We have initial assessment, ongoing assessment, and exit assessment. For initial assessment, we're typically asking whether the learner needs to upgrade their skills. So we're determining whether or not they need to attend the program or participate in the program, and also narrowing down what skills it is that they need to upgrade in order to move on to whatever their goal is. So at that point, you're also identifying what the goal of the learner is in terms of the assessment process. Ongoing assessment is meant to help the learner show how they are making progress while they're actually in the program. And it's also important, I think, as part of ongoing assessment to continue to revisit the goal of the learner and determine whether or not their goal is still the same as the day they walked in the door. As we know, learners often will change their goals as they start to upgrade. It can be the result of, life circumstances or just changing their mind. We're all human beings and we change our mind all the time. So I think that's an important part of ongoing assessment that we don't always articulate, and that is revisiting whether or not the goal is the same. Exit assessment is meant to help the learner determine whether or not they've acquired the skills to be successful to transition to their next step. So those are the basic stages that are part of the OALCF. They weren't new when the OALCF rolled out. These have always been the stages of assessment for as long as I've been working in this field. And I think they're pretty common in almost any type of an education based program, the different stages that you go through. So according to the guidelines, the Literacy and Basic Skills guidelines, the 3 levels of task complexity are used to assess learner proficiency in each of those 6 competencies, which are find and use information, communicate ideas and information, understand and use numbers, use digital technology, manage learning, and engage with others. The OALCF's competency-based approach is meant to help practitioners and learners clarify connections between literacy development and the real-life tasks that they're going to perform when they go out into the world of work, learning, or other community contexts. The framework is meant to help practitioners decide on appropriate placements for learners. So whether in some programs you have different types of programming available, it's meant to help practitioners select and develop materials that will help learners develop the skills. It's meant to be a tool that supports the development of assessment tools that will help you monitor and assess learner performance while they're in the program. What is interesting to note, the curriculum framework does support the development of assessment tools, but with the exception of the milestones and the culminating tasks, there aren't any tools that are specifically developed for the OALCF. However, and one of the reasons that we're doing this webinar is one of the great sources of tools out there are tools that were developed for essential skills because of the relationship between the framework and the essential skills. So many of the tools, or pretty much all of the tools, can be used within the OALCF framework. So I'm just going to take you to a quick, just little case study, and anybody who's been around since the OALCF rolled out might recognize this case study. It was actually part of the initial OALCF training that was developed. So in this case study, Jack is assessed using the OALCF framework. He tells the assessor that he wants to complete his OSSD, or his high school diploma, but he still needs a few credits. He was referred to the program by a local employment service agency, and he was recently laid off after working in a factory for 15 years. He's interested in becoming a welder and wants to obtain his diploma so he can apply for the welder program at his local community college. Now, I know in different areas, this might be a different situation where for certain programs, he could go to academic upgrading or have different pathways into a program like that, especially today as they're developing more and more pre-apprenticeship programs. But in this case, his option is to work with his local literacy agency to do the upgrading so that he can obtain his credits. His task-based assessment yielded the results shown in this table. So it gives you kind of a snapshot of where he is in terms of all the different competencies and task groups. So in order to transition to credit classes, he, in this case, to take credits, he needs to upgrade his skills in a few areas, specifically writing and measurement. And that is based on the understanding that he would need his skills to be, he'd need to be doing tasks at approximately a level 2 in order to move into credit classes. So this is based on the information the program has. This information can then be used to select learning materials to build skills, as well as appropriate milestones to assess his ongoing progress. As we move through the webinar, we're going to discuss or talk about different assessment tools that could be used within this context of the OALCF. So in this example, this case study, we know who was assessed, we know what his assessment results are, but what did we use to do the assessment? That information is not included. And that's because there are so many different tools out there that you can use. And hopefully we'll touch on a bunch of those tools through the webinar and give you some ideas. So when the OALCF was developed, there were tools that were put together that specifically related to assessment. And I'm going to kind of walk through these 3 different tools that were developed with you. They've been around for a long time, but if you are newer to LBS, you might not even know that they exist or that they're out there. So I think it's important to go back and look at what is already available and just to be aware of what is available that's related specifically to OALCF. So all of the tools that I'm on this particular slide, they're all available on the Employment Ontario Partners Gateway, as is anything that is an official document related to the OALCF. So the first resource is Selected Assessment Tools, and it provides practitioners and assessors with examples of a wide range of informal and formal assessment tools that were meant to be able to be used with the OALCF. To assess learners. The collection contains individual assessment tools and an annotated bibliography that lists a bunch of additional tools. So in addition to being a listing of tools, it's meant to emphasize the importance of using a variety of assessment tools, and also to really support the fact that no single tool should be relied upon. It depends on the learner and it depends on what you're assessing and what their goal is. So there's so many tools out there. Having an understanding of what's available is really important. It affirms to the LBS program practitioners and assessors that some of the current tools that people were already using when the OALCF rolled out and that you probably are still using could be used within that context of that framework. So there weren't, as I said, the only 2 types of tools that were developed that were specific to OALCF were milestones and culminating tasks, and they certainly didn't cover the breadth of assessment tools you need to be able to assess properly within a literacy and basic skills program, and that's because there are already lots of tools out there, as well as many tools that are specifically developed for essential skills. And so it's a great listing to go back to, and I'm going to kind of walk you through it in the next few slides. But before we talk more about selected assessment tools, there's also a foundational document, and that provides background information on assessment practices, tools, and principles. The document also was meant to kind of establish a common language to help people talk about assessment practice in Ontario. So that foundations document provides or defines assessment. It discusses the reasons for assessing in literacy and who uses the assessment results. It describes how assessment is categorized. And it also talks about the 2 assessment strategies, which are goal completion and learner gains. Now, goal completion is something that we do capture and report on. Learner gains is not something that we do at this point in time in LBS, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And it also talks about different kinds of assessment tools. So that foundational document is a great PD tool or learning tool, especially for somebody who's really new to the field and new to, literacy in general, adult literacy in general. The final tool is the assessment tool evaluation form, and it's a template that was used to create the entries in that selected assessment tool document. It's meant to help practitioners describe and analyze standard and non-standard assessment tools, so tools that are already there or tools that they're developing. It has several dimensions, including level of formality or informality, usability of the tool, things like if it's already in existence, accessibility, relevance, cost, how easy it is to administer, that type of thing, and also the stage of assessment that tool is most suited to, whether it be initial, ongoing, or exit. With selected assessment tools, the tools listed in that guide were selected based on two key criteria, and that was usability and accessibility. So whether or not they were easily accessible, could you get your hands on them easily, and preferably free, and how usable were they within the program? As well, they're categorized as to whether they suit initial, ongoing, or exit assessment the best. There is a lot of overlap though between the tools. Keep in mind that this was developed in 2011 and we're in 2019 now, so some of the resources probably aren't available anymore, and of course there's lots of new resources that weren't included in this initial document. I'm not going to go through all of these. I just threw the screens in so that you could see the kind of the vast expanse of tools that were included. There's a listing of intake assessment tools, so tools that are well suited to intake assessment in a literacy and basic skills program. And some of these tools we'll talk about again when we're talking about essential skills tools, because there's a crossover. A lot of the tools in here were essential skills tools because of the relationship between the framework and essential skills. With ongoing tools, there's again significant crossover with initial assessment tools. I've said this, but the only standardized ongoing assessment tool we have that was specifically developed to support the OALCF was, of course, the milestones. So a milestone is a goal-related activity that learners complete to demonstrate their ability to carry out goal-related assessment tasks. They're aligned to the competencies and the complexity levels found in the OALCF curriculum framework and are standard indicators of learner progress towards completion of goal path. Milestones answer the question, can learners apply the skills they are developing to purposeful tasks? That's right out of the guidelines, that definition for milestones. So again, there's a pretty wide list of ongoing assessment tools. Last but not least is the exit assessment category. And here, it's a much shorter list. At the top of the list is the only standardized exit assessment tool that was developed to support the OALCF, that being the culminating tasks. So culminating tasks are a key indicator of a learner's readiness to transition to the selected goal. A culminating task is more complex than a milestone task, but it's similarly aligned with the curriculum framework, which is part of the OALCF. And again, as I mentioned, or as with milestones, that definition for culminating task comes right from the guidelines. The culminating tasks are always pretty, there's a lot of, I don't know, talk around culminating tasks. One of the challenges with culminating tasks is that there aren't a lot of them, and often there's a struggle in finding a culminating task that really does match up with a learner's goal. They're related to the goal paths, but the goal path, for example, for employment is so wide and vast in what the learner is actually there to do that there might not be a culminating task that really makes sense for them to complete. So there's a lot of discussion around culminating tasks. Some additional ones were developed a few years ago, but there still aren't a lot of those tasks. So in the next, we're going to kind of flip or move on to talk more specifically about essential skills assessments now. So we've kind of covered what happened in terms of the documentation and resources that were put out there when the OALCF rolled out in terms of assessment resources. And now we're going to talk a little more in depth about essential skills assessments, what they are. We're going to talk about complexity, and hopefully that will help everybody make the connection to why these assessments are also very useful within the context of a literacy and basic skills program. We're going to talk a little bit about the purpose, and we're going to talk about the theory. And I'll just tell you that the information included in this section primarily references the Douglas College Essential Skills Certificate Program course material, which I was provided with to help develop this webinar series. So it's fairly heavy information. There's a lot of it, but it's not a course. It's not meant, you're not meant to come out as an expert after this. It's just meant to skim the surface and give you a sense or some background information about purpose and theory behind essential skills assessments. And I mean, later on, there's lots of information in here that you can use if you want to further your understanding or do some more research around this. Okay, before I start this section, I'm just going to check in and make sure there aren't any pressing questions that need to be answered. I did say I'd do it at the end, but I thought it's a good time to check in. Is there anything, Max, that I need to answer now before I move on?
No, I don't see anything at all. If anyone wants to put their hand up, that would be the time, but otherwise, I think we're good to go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so essential skills assessments. In an essential skills context, an assessment can refer to the assessment of an individual's skill levels, or it could refer to the assessment of the skills required to succeed as a specific task. So an essential skills assessment is a starting point to skill development, to figuring out or identifying whether your skills meet the requirements of an occupation, or in terms of LBS, a training goal. And starting point to identify the steps that need to be taken in order to successfully meet goals. So in terms of essential skills assessment versus traditional assessments, there's actually a significant amount of difference. So with essential skills assessments, they require the person taking the task or the assessment to have a purpose for taking that assessment. And as I go through this, you'll notice that the theory behind this is actually really the same as the theory behind what we're supposed to be doing in terms of assessment in OALCF. So require the test taker to have a purpose for taking the ES assessment. It's not about getting a good grade. It goes beyond that. There has to be a reason for assessing the person. It's not just assessment for assessment's sake. Essential skills assessments measure the here and now skills, and they usually, or they always, require a learner or a test taker to do something by referring to a document. The test items in reading, document use, numeracy, and sometimes writing will use authentic workplace materials. So that's an important one when you're doing an essential skills assessment. It relates to work. So you're looking at using authentic workplace materials. And this is something that we also try to do when we're doing assessment in literacy and basic skills, especially when somebody has a goal path of employment. So an essential skills assessment, a formal one, is statistically validated using item response theory. I'm going to talk about item response theory, give you like a really brief primer on it as we go through this section in case you're not familiar with it. They will provide scores based on the IELTS International Adult Literacy Survey's 500-point scale and or the Employment and Service Development Canada's 1 to 5 level scale. And essential skills assessments use an 80% rate of probability, and I'm also going to talk about that as well as we go through this section. So there are many different purposes for using an ES assessment in an LBS program. Before using an ES assessment, it's really important to determine if this is the right assessment for a learner. Essential skills assessments are typically not standalone assessments. They're only one tool, and other factors and tools that will create the bigger picture for your learner should be considered. And I think that's true of any assessment situation. We can't just rely on one tool. We have to rely on a variety of tools in order to really assess a learner and ensure that they are progressing or have the skills that they need. It should be part of a process and not the only determination for a learner. Assessment or essential skills assessments aren't appropriate for everybody. They should always be presented, as should all assessments, as a positive experience and as an opportunity to identify strengths. So the focus is always on strength as opposed to weakness. They're not pass or fail. People don't pass or fail an essential skills assessment because they're not a measure of intelligence. They're a measure of here and now skills. It's the use it or lose it principle. If a learner hasn't used a skill for a long time, they might have to relearn it. They're meant to provide a starting point for a learner to create a plan to reach their employment or in some cases learning goals. So they have a number of specific purposes if you're using them. It's to verify the skill level for success in training. It might be job specific or technical training. To provide a starting point for career exploration, confirm skill levels, boost confidence, or determine if a skill level is suitable already for a specific occupation. So determine whether or not somebody can do tasks at an appropriate level to be able to be successful in a particular job or occupation. Essential skills assessments are premised on good assessment practice. So anytime any assessment is administered, whether it be an essential skills assessment or any type of an assessment in LBS, good assessment practice dictates that the learner should know the purpose of the assessment, have an overview of what the assessment is testing, like what is it that they're going to be tested on, have really clear directions or instructions for completing the assessment, and be told upfront when and how the results will be communicated so that there's no question there. I'm going to talk about item response theory. I said I would talk about this when I brought it up earlier. And try to do, I'm going to take you through kind of a primer or a brief overview of what item response theory is. Because it's the process used to score formal essential skills assessments, which is what we're talking about right now. So item response theory differs from classical test theory, where all the questions would typically have equal weight. So in classic test theory, the question is how many questions were answered correctly. Item response theory is different because the score provides an estimate of the respondent's ability to answer the questions at different levels of complexity correctly. So IRT focuses on individual test items, and it asks the question, what level of difficulty did the test taker perform at? Now, I'm going to tell you, I am by no means an expert on item response theory. I have a little bit of, research background on it. So again, I'm going to try to give you a very basic overview of it. And if you have some questions, you can ask them at the end, or I can even send you to, you'll see that there's going to be some information here that you might be able to go to some other sources if you want to learn more about it. So again, this is just to give you a grounding in it so you understand how essential skills assessments are scored. So in item response theory, points relate to proficiency levels and the complexity of a task, very similar to OALCF. Every item on the assessment is assigned an IRT score that reflects the complexity level of the task and the test taker's proficiency level required to complete that task. So this approach, again, it's used in essential skills assessments, formal essential skills assessments, sometimes informal ones as well, but definitely informal ones, and we'll talk about the difference in between formal and informal assessments. Individuals can see the increase in their proficiency levels and the increase reflected on the IELTS or International Adult Literacy Survey scale, the 500-point scale, which uses an IRT framework. So there's, again, a relationship to the International Adult Literacy scale. And I apologize, these are some text-heavy slides, but it's hard to make this super interesting. It's the information, you just have to absorb it. I'm gonna just continue on, and then I'm gonna give you an example that I think helps a lot because it helped me understand it. So the IRT scoring method used in formal ES assessments was established by IELTS. There's a 500-point scale in IELTS, and that scale point assigned to each item in each domain was the point at which respondents with a desired level of proficiency would have a given probability of responding correctly to an item. So in IELTS, an 80% probability, or 4 out of 5 times, of a correct response was the desired level of ability. So that means when someone doing a test item with a particular scale score completes tasks at a certain point on the IELTS scale, there is an 80% probability that they're going to respond correctly, again, 4 out of 5 times. The probability rate, or rate of probability, was chosen for formal ES assessments because it matches that used in IELTS. So it's the same rate of probability in both ES assessments and IELTS, but also because, and this goes to the connection to the workplace again, because of the belief that completing a workplace task correctly less than 80% of the time is not an acceptable level of competence for a productive worker. So there's an expectation that if you're going into a workplace, you should be able to complete a task correctly 80% of the time or more. And anything less than that means that you probably don't have the skills at the appropriate level to be able to participate or work in that particular job. Hope that all makes sense. This is an example that you may have seen before, and again, it comes from the Douglas College course material, and I think it really explains it well. It explains response probability, that concept. So in this example, a respondent or a test taker with a proficiency level of 225, so on that 0 to 500 point scale, would be expected to correctly complete tasks fixed at that level at 225 80% of the time. So, and just note to that, the same respondent would be expected to correctly complete tasks at a higher level, e.g. 275 less than 80% of the time, and complete tasks at a lower level, for example, 180, more than 80% of the time. So in this analogy, you have a high jumper, and at a probability rate of 80, someone would successfully be able to clear that bar 4 out of 5 times. So this is a reasonable rate of success for completing work tasks. And that means that 80% of the time somebody's going to complete a task correctly. So that's just gives you a bit of a background on what item response theory is and the basis for essential skills formal tests. So again, item response theory provides an estimate of the respondent's ability to answer the questions at different levels of complexity correctly. Item response theory focuses on individual test items and what level of difficulty did the test taker perform at. Okay. So essential skills assessments, understanding complexity. So within essential skills assessments, there are 4 main factors that affect the complexity of a test item or a test question. So it's these items that help determine the level that we were talking about before. So there's type of match, there's type of processing, there's type of requested information, and plausibility of distractors. So it's important to remember that complexity is always on a continuum, and the descriptors are not necessarily set in stone. So for example, a task that requires someone to cycle, which is a type of match, to determine the answer to a question can be relatively simple or complex depending on other factors included in determining complexity. So it's all these factors together that must be taken into consideration when you're determining complexity. And again, I'm going to walk you through each of these 4 factors and give you a very brief overview, just a snapshot so that you have that background piece. So type of match. Type of match is really about what the reader has to do to find the answer. It's really closely related to the type of requested information, which we're also going to talk about. But the main question you're asking is, what do I have to do to find the answer? Do I have to locate information? Do I have to cycle through something to find the information? Do I have to integrate information, or am I actually generating information? When you look at the descriptions of the international adult literacy levels, you can see the correlation to type of match. At level one, you're locating. At level 2, you're cycling. At level 3, you're integrating. Level 4, you're integrating, synthesizing, and using prior knowledge. And finally, at level 5, you're generating. So this just gives you a very brief overview of those 5 different levels. And again, this is building on some of the information that we covered in the Back to Basics webinar on the different levels and the different levels within essential skills in each of the skill domains. But this kind of gives you, this is the background or the methodology to it. So the next area we're going to talk about is type of requested information, or TORI. And it's about what answer the reader is looking for. So it's really closely related again, or linked to the type of match. So the question is, what answer am I looking for? Am I looking for a name? Am I looking for an amount? Am I looking for an explanation? So again, that's one of the factors that affects complexity when you're looking at or having to interact with a document or information. The next factor is the type of process. So that asks, or that what you're asking with the type of process, is what do I need to do with the type of requested information to find the answer? So for example, you might ask somebody to identify a price or summarize a paragraph. Those are both examples of type of process. What process do I use to give the answer? Do I describe? Do I persuade? So this is the different, you can identify, sort, define, describe, narrate, summarize, compare, contrast, explain, justify, and persuade. And you can see that that's on a continuum as well. And as you move along, things are slightly more complex or difficult along that process continuum. Difficulty in type of process is based on thinking process that is needed to find the type of requested information. So again, this is the third main area or factor that affects the complexity of something. Last but not least is the plausibility of distractors. So distractions in a text or a document can really contribute to the reader getting the wrong information from that document. When the information in the text meets some but not all of the conditions specified in the question, it is referred to as a distractor for the given information. So if it's not a direct match to find it, there's other information that somebody has to get through. Those are distractors. When information in the text appears to complete the requested information but is actually incorrect, it's referred to as a distractor for the requested information. And the more conditions that a distractor shares with the search term or the correct answer, the more plausible it becomes. So again, that's the fourth main area, plausibility of the distractors, that affects the complexity. This is all pretty heady stuff. And again, we're just skimming the surface, giving you kind of the quick and dirty overview of it. You can do a lot of reading about this and really dig in and to get a really good understanding of it. But I think just having an overview helps you get a sense of where complexity comes from when you're looking at essential skills, and also how some of that was pulled into the OALCF. This particular diagram that I included, I'm not going to explain too much about it. I just put it in here because I think it can be useful if you want to kind of dig in further. So this framework, or it's called the periodic table of learning, is also known as Mosenthal taxonomy, and Mosenthal is a pretty famous person in the world of assessment. So this framework was developed to be used to determine and control the complexity level of questions. So it kind of gives you a blueprint or a map to be able to develop questions and get a sense to make them be a specific complexity. So I'm not explaining this exactly as I hope to, but it's very hard to explain. The question structure framework looks at the 3 different parts of the question, which we've talked about: the type of requested information, the type of match, and then the type of processing. So if you look along the top, I'll just use my highlighter here. So along the type of requested information, the type of processing, and then the type of match. And you'll notice that what I've walked you through for each of those 3 are included in this within this framework. So I just wanted to include it because I think you can do some more research if you really want to dig in, as I said, and it's important to know that the tool is out there if you're actually developing your own assessments. It can be helpful in determining or matching up, making sure that the complexity of the questions that you're developing are actually where you want them to be on that scale. So, and again, we're just skimming the surface with this stuff, but with respect to quantitative factors, so numeracy tasks, there's 2 main things that you're looking at, and that is type of operation. So what is the actual arithmetic operation being performed? Are you adding, are you subtracting, multiplying, dividing, or are you doing a combination of them? And then the specificity of the operation. So how easy is it to set up the operation that you need to do in order to complete the task? It's easier if the numbers are obvious, if the numbers are organized instead of random, and arithmetic needed to complete the task is obvious. If it's very obvious from the task what you need to do, then it's less complex. If it's not so obvious, it becomes more complex on that scale. Okay. So this slide just shows you the relationship between the International Adult Literacy Survey, and that's the 0 to 500 point scale, and the Essential Skills scale. So you can see level 1 covers 0 to 225, level 2, 226 to 275, and so on. As with IELTS scores, formal test scores for each domain may be expressed as a raw score out of 400 or out of 500. So, for example, 250 out of 500 could also be expressed as level 2. So that raw score or the number score tells somebody exactly where they would be on that 500 point scale. And then the level score is going to tell somebody which band of points or which grouping of points the ability is located, whether it be level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. The term learner gains in LBS, which we hear about, would refer to an assessment that could provide a score on that 500 point level scale in a pre and post type of an assessment situation. So the concept behind learner gains would be that somebody would do a test that was actually standardized and formal on using the 500 point scale, and they would do that test in a pre and post situation. So pre receiving literacy and basic skills programming, and post receiving literacy and basic skills programming. And a movement in the score would show learner gains progress. As you know, if you work in a funded LBS program, learner gains is something that we don't capture. There have been many or a few different assessments piloted, but none as of yet have been selected for LBS, which is why we still don't actually capture that type of data in LBS. It's pretty challenging to have that type of assessment put in place. And part of the issue, I think, is just that in LBS we serve such a wide range of learners and such a wide range of goals in the program. It's very hard to have a standardized test like that that specifically gives a pre and post. So I'm going to talk now about the different types of essential skills assessments, and there are three main types or applications. You have formal, you have informal, and you have self-assessment. So the validity of the results are one of the main differences with formal assessments because they provide a validated score on that IELTS 500-point scale or the essential skills 1 to 5 level scale. The formal assessments that are available only cover 3 of the domains, while there are self-assessment tools available for all 9 essential skills, for example. So there are different, the ES assessments that are out there are categorized into either formal, informal, or self-assessment. I'm going to talk a lot about, I'm going to walk you through some of the ones that are available as we move through this section. Because you can access a lot of these assessments. They're out there for you to use, but understanding what type of an assessment they are can be very important because you want to make sure that you're using them for the right purpose or application. So in terms of formal assessments, for the learner, they can be used to establish a level to enter training, and they can also be used to identify potential skill gaps that can be addressed. For the instructor, a formal assessment can be also useful because it can identify the required skills for success in training, identify skill gaps, and in turn be used to work or develop a training or learning plan. So they have a wide application beyond just for a specific employment or occupation. They can be used within the context of training or literacy and basic skills. With informal assessments, they're meant to really assist a learner in understanding current levels, the tasks that they can do at current levels, assist with career planning, help prepare for more formal assessment that they might have to participate in, and again, identify potential skill gaps. For the instructor, they can give a broader understanding of all skill levels, again, help with the development of training or learner plans, and help an instructor assist learners understand the skill levels that are required for specific occupations that they might be interested in pursuing, and identify skill gaps. So the application crosses over a lot with formal assessment. The difference is the validity of the results really between the two. So the formal assessment, I would describe it as more of a high stakes assessment. It's going to give you a valid score. Informal, not so valid. And with self-assessment, it's really, they're really not valid scores, but they still provide assessments, some assistance in terms of program development and learner awareness, so they can help the learner identify skills needed for various careers. They can assist to articulate or explore skills, so help a learner explore the skills, and also provide a tool to reflect on those soft skills that we talk about all the time in LBS. For the instructor, kind of it mirrors what they can do for the learner. Can help assist with understanding transferable jobs for job search, provide a tool for discussion on soft skills, and assist to develop training for soft skills. So those are the different applications of the ES assessment. I'm going to I have a few case studies. They're more homework case studies. They're things for you to take back to your program in terms of thinking about the applications of assessments and whether or not you're using formal, informal, or self-assessments, be they essential skills assessments or other assessments with different case studies. So I'm going to just kind of describe each case study, but this is more of a homework discussion piece that you can take back and use as PD with the group of practitioners that you're with. So with each of there's 3 of them. consider the learner that's being described and think about what type of assessment would make the most sense for each learner. There are no right or wrong answers for each of them. So the first example is Ginny, and she's 48 years old. She's been working as a waitress for 20 years. She's developed arthritis and can no longer work in an industry that requires her to stand and lift. And she doesn't know what type of job she's capable of. So in this case, think about and take back and discuss later on what type of assessment tool you think you would choose for her and why. Something high stakes, something formal, something more informal. And as we walk through the tools later on, you might actually be able to think of specific tools that you might want to use with her. The second example, Liam, 29 years old, he's considering taking training to become a computer tech because he's unhappy with his current employment as a security guard. He loves playing computer games and thinks he would do well as a computer technician. So what type of assessment would you choose and why? Would you do something formal, informal, or a self-assessment with him? Or would you do a combination of assessments? And the last one for you to take back and think about is Josh. So he's 22 years old. He's applied for funding to take heavy duty equipment operator training. He dropped out of high school in grade 10, but he's confident he has the ability to get through private training for which he's already been accepted. He just needs the funding. His EO consultant has referred him to you to find out if he has the skills needed to succeed in this training. So what type of assessment do you think would be most appropriate in this particular scenario and why? And again, there are no right or wrong answers. These are just food for thought for you to go back and think about the type of assessment you're using in particular situations. Okay. So in terms of the 3 different types of assessment tools, what I've got on the next, through the next little bit is just some lists of tools that are out there and whether or not they would be categorized as formal, so they have valid results, informal, not necessarily valid results, but still pretty robust, and then self-assessment tools. So for formal assessment tools, you've probably heard a lot of these before. I did not put the links in because whenever I put links in, they always seem to move or change, but I'm sure that you'd be able to find most of them with a quick Google search. You'll also notice as we go through these tools that a lot of them are found on the selected tools list that support the OALCF. And there's a reason for that. It's because of the relationship between essential skills and the OALCF. But there are more tools that are specific to ES listed in these 3 slides. So test of workplace essential skills, or TOWS, that's a very well-known test, as is TOWS Prime. Essential Skills Group has a test that is considered formal. The Workplace Essential Skills Assessment is also a formal test. ACE has the Essential Skills Online Test, so that's the online academic upgrading program. ESOT, you may have heard of, is the Essential Skills for Ontario's Tradespeople, so that's also an online test that does have validated results. The Industry Trade Authority Essential Skills test or tool is also a valid and formal tool. And then the EASY, or the Essential Skills for Employment and Education, which is the partner test to the ESOT, the tradesperson test, also is available. So these tests aren't necessarily available free of charge. A lot of them, there's a cost associated with participating in them, unless there's some pockets of funding. But it's good to be aware of them, because in some cases, if you have somebody who, for example, wants to go onto a particular trade, it could be very useful for them to do the Essential Skills for Ontario Tradespeople assessment, because it will give you a really good understanding of the tasks they're able to currently do and the level and where they need to be able to participate in that trade. So these are all really important, like great to take a look at if you're not familiar with them, and they are all valid or formal tools. There are a number of informal essential skills tools as well. And again, these aren't necessarily all available free of charge. You do have to, in some cases, pay for training or pay to access them or have a trainer or an assessor administer them, but they can also be very useful. So the camera assessment, which many of you might be familiar with, it's widely used in LBS, is one of the considered an informal ES tool, but definitely linked to essential skills. The Common Assessment of Basic Skills, CABS, is also a very widely used and widely known tool in LBS. The Measure Up website, hosted by Skill Plan, and that you can access free of charge, is another informal essential skills tool. And then the It's Essential tool for ESL and FSL and the diagnostic checklists are informal tools that are related to learners that are more on the language training pathway. So those learners that English isn't their first language or French isn't their first language, but also they are related to essential skills. So those are all out there. And again, I didn't provide links, but you can easily find them if you do a Google search. Last but not least in the grouping are the self-assessments. So there are lots of examples of self-assessments, but these are some of the most common ones. So the Employment and Skill Development Canada's ES assessments, there's a number of self-assessments available that you can access. Some are actually completed online, some you can download as a hard copy. The eSport Essential Skills Portfolio is an essential skills site. And again, I believe there's a cost for that one, but it is a site where there are self-assessments available related to essential skills. The Ontario Skills Passport, which is actually part of the Ministry of Education, and developed by them, has self-assessments included in it. Now that site is still accessible. It's not as robust as it used to be in terms of tools and resources that are there, but I checked it right before I came online and you still can access it at this point. For a while it was inaccessible, but there are lots of tools and all you have to do is Google Ontario Skills Passport. And then Connecting Literacy and Employment Through Essential Skills is another tool that has self-assessments included in it. So again, there's lots of essential skills related tools out there. The valid tools are the formal tools are the ones that give you a valid score. The informal tools, they do provide a score, but they're not considered as formal. And then of course the self-assessments aren't necessarily, they're giving you an idea, not necessarily a score that is validated at all, but they give you an idea or assist with planning and preparation. So those are the three kind of groupings of assessments and the main ones that are involved. I'm going to just walk you through tell you a little bit more about the Employment and Social Development Canada. I think I said that wrong in the last slide. I've been around for a long time and they change their name a lot, as do most ministries these days. They have an extensive collection of assessment tools and different resources that you can integrate into instruction. They're categorized by job seekers and workers, apprentices, trainers, and employers. So first of all, the tools are categorized, which makes it quick and easy. There's a guide called Making the Tools Work for You, which is very helpful. But they include a number of different things like online indicators and checklists, self-assessments, tip sheets, essential skills profiles, and essential skills for 15 different trades. So this is a fantastic free resource. And if you haven't ever gone there and looked at what's available, you can probably find some very useful things that you can integrate into programming, especially in relationship to somebody who is on the employment goal path. So this is also where you find the essential skills profiles, which can be incredibly useful. with employment goal path, especially related to specific occupations, because it gives you a sense of the tasks that somebody has to do for particular occupations and the level that they need to be working at in the task completion, the complexity level that they need to be at. So that, in conjunction with some of the tools that are available, can really help you build a learner plan in terms learner needs to do. And again, it's very easy to relate that back to the OALCF, because the relationship between the essential skills scale and the OALCF is very closely tied. And again, in the first webinar, we walked through that connection, and you can access that material just to see how closely related those two are, the skill domains and the competencies. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through, just talk a little bit about an example of an agency and how they have integrated essential skills into assessment practices. So again, I'm talking about a literacy agency that is part of the Literacy and Basic Skills funding. So they're OALCF based, they're required to use OALCF, but this just gives you a sense of how you can pull from the essential skills tools and resources, assessment resources that are out there, to integrate essential skills into your assessment practices. So in this case, we're going to talk about Agency B, and it's a very non-creative name. But Agency B is a community-based literacy program, and they've been funded for 12 years to deliver literacy and basic skills programming. In this case, Agency B has one full-time instructor and volunteer tutors. And I'll just tell you, Agency B is actually based on a real agency. Their target each year is 60 learners. So that is their target. And 50% of the learners that they work with are on the employment goal path. So that means that there's a number of learners that are not on the employment goal path. So approximately 20 clients access small group instruction in this agency, and the remaining 40 receive one-on-one programming with volunteer tutors. Those who aren't accessing the employment goal path are either moving on to further education and training, or they are just there to enhance their personal independence, all of which are still valid goal paths under the Literacy and Basic Skills program. So some of the practices that this agency implemented to support the integration of essential skills. When a client enters the program, the initial assessment involves the introduction of essential skills via the use of the 3 indicator tools developed by Human Resources Social Development Canada. So again, we just walked through a slide where I told you about tons of resources that are available on that website. So in this case, the agency has pulled the reading indicator, the document use indicator, and the numeracy indicator, all of which very nicely coordinate with the OALCF in terms of find and use information, communicate ideas and information, and understand and use numbers, those competencies. So they cross over those competencies. An integrated essential skills section in this agency has been added to the learner training plans. They're really, really keen. This section documents the results of the essential skills indicator tools used at assessment. All the tutors and instructors receive training to increase their knowledge of essential skills and how to integrate them into training delivery. Another strategy, if a client has a specific employment goal, the essential skills profile is downloaded and discussed with the client. The required essential skill levels indicated in the particular job profile are incorporated into the learner trainer plan. So those essential skills profiles can be incredibly helpful in really structuring the learner program, the individual learner's program, because every learner is going to be doing something different for the most part. And that really gives a great blueprint as to what a learner needs to work on. The levels are going to give you a good indication of where the learner needs to be, and if you have assessed their levels at intake, it's going to give you a good sense of where they are and where they need to be if they're moving on to a particular occupation, and you have that profile available. Clients who have goals in the other pathways discuss the relationship of essential skills to their pathway with the instructor or tutor. So in general, the program delivery makes ongoing connections to the 9 essential skills. All learners' demonstrations of progress are cross-referenced to the 9 essential skills. Clients are introduced to the self-assessment tools available in that toolkit on Human Resources and Social Development Canada, and clients are encouraged to use the tools that are appropriate to their goals. Clients might complete those 3 indicators again that they completed when they entered the program, when they feel they have made a significant amount of progress or at exit. So again, this is kind of a perfect world situation where an agency really wants to integrate or reflect on the essential skills in their program. And these are just different strategies that can be used. I don't think that, although I said this is based on an actual agency, I was talking more about the agency profile. Probably an agency wouldn't do this across the board with every single learner, but some of these strategies might be very useful with particular learners depending on what their goal path and specific goal is in that program. So that just gives you some ideas of how to integrate essential skills into the assessment process by using those indicator tools, as a pre and a post, just to give a sense of progress, and just integrate the different tools that are available throughout the programming, as well as make sure that agency staff understand the essential skills and their relationship to the OALCF. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to talk about other assessment resources that are out there. There's lots of them. I'm going to just focus on a few. I've given you lists and lists of resources from selected resources. We've talked about resources that are specifically essential skills assessment resources. And I'm going to talk about a few other things that are out there that you might want to take a look at if you're not already using. Okay, before I do that though, I'm just going to check in again and make sure that we don't have any questions. Okay. I'm kind of scrolling through the chat here. There was an audience question about the list of ES and formal, and self-assessment tools. Is that available in French? Because this particular webinar, the slide deck was translated into French, it should be included in the French version of the slide deck that you can actually download. So I'll answer that question. Does anybody else have any questions? If you can go ahead and put up your hand, and Max can let me know if you do. Just give you a second. Take a drink. Anything, Max?
No, nothing's popping up, so we should be good to go.
Okay, good. Everybody's pretty quiet this afternoon, so I know there's a lot of information in this, and I've gone through it fairly quickly. But again, if you have questions at the end, you can ask them, or I will always take questions if people want to email me. So moving along, we're going to again talk about other assessment resources that are out there. So a fairly large project that took place a few years ago was the Common Assessment for the OALCF Goal Paths. This is a fantastic resource. It was designed to be accessed or used by practitioners in its entirety for all 5 of the goal paths, or for specific goal paths, and or just for the assessment activities or tracking tools that are included in it. So each tool and resource included in this particular package has value in and of itself. You can use the different pieces separately, but you can incorporate them into any of your current assessment strategies. What's really nice about this tool, and I can tell you we use this in my service delivery agency a lot, we pull from this resource, is that it has resource packages for each of the 5 goal paths. So it's broken down by goal path, and it includes a strategy for assessment components. So it includes a strategy for the initial, ongoing, and exit assessment. So it's a fantastic tool, and it obviously was developed specifically for OALCF. and aligns with it. It includes activities, language, and tools that are clear and appropriate at all 3 levels. So it also covers the 3 levels that we work with in literacy and basic skills in Ontario. Its approaches to assessment practices are consistent, and the tools are consistent and user-friendly within this particular package. So if you're not familiar with it or you don't use it, highly recommended to take a look and pull from it because it does a lot of the work for you. It was developed in 2014, and it's all available online. So with respect to Literacy Link Eastern Ontario, they had a significant number of assessment tools, and they aligned their tools with the curriculum framework to help practitioners when they were using the tools that they were already accessing that Leo had developed and the OALCF. So this project included articulating the Common Assessment of Basic Skills, which is CABS demonstrations, and the CABS Online and Workplace Essential Skills Assessment to the competencies of the OALCF. When we were talking about essential skills assessment, CABS is considered one of the kind of official informal essential skills assessments. So there's definitely a good connection there. And the fact that it has been specifically aligned to the OALCF makes it even easier to use and incorporate within that within the program, the LBS program. So each assessment has a template that has been developed to align to the 2 systems. So again, that's a great place to go if you're looking for the connection between CABS and the OALCF. And of course, it aligns with also the essential skills. So it's a big win-win with all of those tools. In 2018, the Northern Networks, of which most of you probably are part of the Mid-North Network or some of the Northern Networks, they did an assessment webinar series. So many of you are probably familiar with it, but those of you who might be newer or didn't have an opportunity to access it, there are 6 different webinars that you can actually still access. And they cover a variety of topics specific to assessment, including understanding the difference between task-based and skill-based assessment, choosing assessment tools and methods, measuring progress, tracking learner achievement related to learner goals, so that goal completion piece, developing a strategy, and using assessment results to inform your targets. And finally, a task-based assessment case strategy from entry to exit. So that group of webinars is also a great place to go to enhance your knowledge about assessment within the OALCF and within the literacy and basic skills system or program, sorry. And again, those are accessible. I did put the link in for those. You can get those from the Learning Network of Ontario's website, and you can actually listen to all of those webinars. The essential skills getting people prepared for work was a project that it was a project partnership between Mohawk College, the Adult Basic Education Association, which is the regional network in the South, and the Hamilton Training Advisory Board. So this Hamilton project was to help determine an individual's learning needs to support their employment, education, or training goals. Through this project, an individual could access essential skills assessments, upgrading courses, and essential skills that were specific to manufacturing workshops. So this is a great resource to go to because it can be used with practitioners or clients looking for more information around essential skills and labor market information related specifically to the manufacturing section. So again, it gives there's lots of information in there, and it's very specific. There's a lot of specific information to assessment, and it's again tied to the essential skills. So it's a great resource to go to if you're looking for more information. So the Essential Skills mobile app assessment tool for teachers and students is also something that's available. And what's kind of neat about this is it's an app and it profiles 40 different trade and technology careers. It also gives a summary of the 9 essential skills for the workplace. And oops, sorry. And it has a set of questions that can be completed in about 15 to 20 minutes. The results are provided as a star rating link to careers and trades and technologies. So it's essentially an assessment that you go through. You answer questions that take about 15 to 20 minutes, and then it gives you links to careers in both the trade and technology sectors that might be of interest, or something that someone has some of the skills or interest in. So there's also a link in it to the Employment and Social Development Canada Office of Literacy and Essential Skills, and that gives you access to those national occupational profiles. And it also, your results can be compared against the levels of complexity in the profiles for specific skilled trades. So it's just a neat app that was developed a couple years ago. And I did put the link there because it's a bit hard to find, but it's just another tool that might be useful for some learners in your program, some but not all, because it's going to be a specific group of learners that are going to want to use an app to do this type of an assessment, but it's always good to have a range of tools available. So those were just some of the other tools that are out there that we were highlighting. Again, there's so many, it's hard to capture everything. And it's important to remember with the list that's provided in selected assessment tools for OALCF, and also the list that were provided for the informal, formal, and self-assessment for the essential skills assessments. Those aren't necessarily comprehensive lists of everything that is out there. They're the most common resources that are out there right now that you can access. There are other things that we have not highlighted, or even perhaps quite possibly missed, that are out there that have been developed, but it gives you a starting point for finding some additional resources. Okay. I hear some movement. Is there a... Okay. Thought I heard somebody. Okay. So why use an essential skills assessment approach with OALCF? Like, why are we even doing this webinar? Why is this an important topic? Well, first of all, except for milestones and culminating tasks, assessment tools specifically developed to support the OALCF have not been widely developed. There hasn't been any real significant investment in any additional tools specifically related to assessment that would support the OALCF. So we know there's 60 milestones. We had a minor, there was a little bit of an investment in doing an adaptation to some of those milestones so that they were more appropriate for learners who found some of them a little bit challenging in terms of, although they were assessing maybe speaking and listening, they had to do reading to do them. So there were some adaptations made to them, but still, wide and large, we have basically 60 milestones that we can access. And that isn't a lot of standardized tools. As far as the culminating tasks, we have the original set of 6, and I think we now have 18. So there was some additional investment, but not a lot in the last few years. So therefore, we kind of have to look to other sources if we're not developing our own tools. Some of the purpose of this webinar was to give you the theory behind essential skills complexity, to help you understand that if you're developing your own tools and developing your own questions, to understand how to determine the complexity of the questions you're asking. But again, we don't typically have the time to invest in that type of development, especially at the service delivery agency level, because we're busy delivering service. Other formal and informal tools developed to support essential skills can be really useful, especially in terms of initial and ongoing assessment. So being able to pull from some of those other tools that are out there, especially those that were developed related to essential skills, can be helpful because there is a definite correlation in between the levels, the essential skills levels and the OALCF levels, so they fit very nicely within our framework. The essential skills assessments that are related to specific occupations or groups of occupations can be really helpful to determine whether or not someone is ready to transition or move on from the LBS program. So again, those tools can be helpful to draw on, and they do work really well within our framework. Last but not least, and I have already kind of said this, but understanding the methodology behind essential skills assessments can really help us if we're trying to develop any new assessments for the curriculum framework within the program itself. So having that understanding, even as basic as we kind of covered today, just gives you a starting point if you are interested in actually developing your own assessments. So that's kind of the premise behind taking a step back and looking at the essential skills assessments and how they relate to OALCF and why we would want to take a look at that and understand the methodology behind those assessments. So as far as content, we have reached the end of the kind of information download today. And again, I know there's a lot of information here. You can download the PowerPoints and take a look, and if you have questions even after today, you can feel free to try to forward them on. When we move on to the next webinar, the final webinar in the series is going to be really specifically focused on curriculum and essential skills. So we're going to look at complexity in terms of the OALCF and task analysis and using those essential skills profiles, which I've talked about in terms of assessment, but using them in terms of developing curriculum, and also taking a look at all the curriculum resources that are out there that do relate to essential skills, but are very useful within the Literacy and Basic Skills program. So as far as, we haven't set a date yet, but I suspect it will be very early in the new year when we do the third in this series of webinars on the essential skills and the OALCF. So at this point, I said I would leave some time for questions, and I wanted to make sure we had lots of time today. I'm going to open it up if anybody has any questions, and I will do my very best to answer them. And if I can't answer them today, I will try to answer them afterwards and make sure that you get that response.
So there was a question saying that the mobile app link is not in the handout. I did double check and I don't see it. So I don't know if you're able to copy that over.
I will, can we send that out after? I can't put it in the chat from my end.
Yeah, for sure. Not a problem.
Yeah, I will. I apologize. I added a few things into the webinar right before. I always go through it the day of and check some links, and I did add that link in. So it isn't in the copy that you have, but I will make sure it gets sent out to you. Just let me, I'm going to flip back to it because if you can probably copy it down too if you want, while we're taking questions, if anybody has any. It's always hard when we do webinars in the afternoon, right after lunch, because it's the sleepy time of the day. So I know it's hard for people to come up with questions and even to be able to focus and pay attention for that long in this type of a format. So I do appreciate all the people who showed up today. We had a nice turnout, so I hope it was useful, and I hope you have some takeaways from this of tools that you might be able to use and a good understanding of, or a basic understanding anyways, of the methodology behind essential skills complexity. Have you seen any other questions, Max?
I have more of a comment. Leslie
Okay.
mentioned that if you go to the Play Store and just type in essential skills, it'll come up right away.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that.
So, question, is the mobile app an application to download on devices, or is it only an online link? It seems to be a mobile link on my device.
I believe there's an app you can download. That's the link to the web page where you can actually kind of get the information about it. And from there, I think it says you can download it from the, I think it's available on Apple and maybe Android.
Yeah, so it was mentioned that on Android, it would be the Play Store, I guess. And that if you search essential skills, that should come up.
Yep.
Oh, perfect. That answers the question. Okay, so for the formal assessments, redoing them after intake to see growth, are there other sites that do that? We do to check the readiness for higher level courses, but I wondered if anyone else does.
Okay, so that's kind of a question for the participants.
Yeah, if anyone wants to be unmuted, definitely just put your hand up and I can go ahead and unmute you.
Yeah. From my perspective, we, in my own service delivery agency, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I do manage a service delivery agency. I'm master of all trades there. We actually don't typically do this, so I'm kind of, we use profiles. We do use the self-assessments in that, but we don't typically use the formal assessments. So I don't have a good answer to that, but somebody else might be doing that. Did anybody put up their hand?
No.
I can't see the people, so.
No hands up as of yet. Oh, you know what? There's two. Okay,
Oh,
so
great.
I had to bring them up. Okay, so Stefan, I'm going to unmute you. Should be good.
No, la question est passée. Sorry, question I got answered.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, and now Kim has her hand up, so I will unmute you, Kim. Good to go.
Okay, well, sorry, I don't have anything else to add to that. So if somebody wants to comment on that again later, we can probably send out information. Any other questions from the audience?
Kim, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Oh, I'm sorry. When you said good to go, I thought you meant she was good to go.
No, sorry, I meant she was unmuted.
Yeah, sorry about that, Kim.
Okay, so probably just an accidental hand up.
Yep,
I'm gonna bring it back down, but definitely feel free to bring it back up if we miss something. Okay, Kim?
Okay. Anything else?
Pretty quiet over here.
Okay, well, let's wrap it up. Again, if you have any other questions, send them through to the Mid-North Network and she'll be happy to send them on to me. You can send them to me directly if you can find me. And I just want to thank everybody for attending today. And it was, again, a pretty heavy content. So hopefully that you took something away from it. I always say if I attend some training and I can take away an idea or piece of information that's useful, it's worth it. So I hope that you felt that way today. And I want to just thank Mid-North for having me do this webinar. And again, don't forget that we will be doing the third webinar. I'm guessing sometime in the early in the new year.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. If any of you did have a hard time downloading the attachments and would like me to email it over, this would be a good time to put your hand up and I will write down your names and make sure I send that over within a day or two. Also, I will put my email address in the chat. It's admin.mnn@vianet.ca. So if any of you need to reach out, definitely feel free. And I will do what I can to answer your questions.